The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Stephen Sakach here again with my co-host, Mike Liwski, and our special guest today. So according to Harvard Business Review, purpose-driven companies outperform the market by 42% in profitability and retention. Yet too often, leaders focus on just profit as the destination rather than the byproduct of doing meaningful work. So Conscious Capitalism challenges us and challenges that mindset and asks leaders to build businesses where people, purpose, and profit thrive together. Today, we explore what it looks like to lead a company where love and purpose are not just values, but operating principles. Mike, introduce our guest today.
Stephen, I'll be absolutely delighted to. Our guest today is Neal Courtney. He is the CEO of Cookie Cutters, which is one of the fastest growing family-friendly franchise brands. And it's not a bakery. It's got nothing to do with cupcakes, although maybe you'll find a cookie or a cupcake there. But it's one of the premier children's hair salons. Now, Neal, with his career spanning consumer products, franchising, as well as purpose-based leadership, he's been able to really build businesses through his career where really people come first and profits follow, as we love to discuss here on the show and beat the drum on that. So he's as well known for transforming Cookie Cutters into a brand that brings joy to families while empowering franchisees to build meaningful community-based businesses. So Neal, we are so excited for the show that we have before us today. Welcome to our show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. When I got this invite, I was overly excited because I think the mantra of the show really fits me as an individual and what we try to accomplish as an organization. I kind of came from, the late 90s through business school where it was all about maximizing shareholder value, MBA 101. And I worked for a couple of public companies, and it was next quarter, with very little conversation about the other stakeholders. And I love this concept of conscious capitalism. I think it correlates extremely well with responsible franchising. And what we do is at Cookie Cutters, and Mike, you said it extremely well, we're not just about a haircut. Our purpose is to provide joy, joy to the child, joy to the parent, which comes and is projected through the child. And one of the biggest things is the contribution that we potentially have with that client, with that child as they progress, when they look in the mirror after a haircut and they feel good about themselves and they might get a compliment as they walk out. That's something that sticks. And with that, it's a flywheel that then comes back to the franchisee. And that positive feedback gives them purpose. So we've got to be well rooted in the community. And our business is about acquisition, retention, and frequency. And that doesn't exist without being conscious and being aware and having purpose. And everything we do, whether it be from a franchisee perspective, a customer perspective, or our client, who is the child, everything revolves around that sense of responsibility. And we know that by doing that, the profit will come. And if you do things the right way, with the right vision and the right why and the right purpose, then that retention portion will just perpetuate, which will then increase frequency. And then all your stakeholders, including our customers, become your biggest advocate. So I'm super excited to be here. I'm super excited to kind of share my thoughts and hopefully have some impact outside of just what we do.
Amen.
Yeah, I love
that.
it.
Yes.
I've said a lot of those words in some form or another over the past couple of years doing this show, just because, it's just right on the money. I want to dive in a little to, so how, we talked about these kind of principles of conscious capitalism, and you kind of mentioned like all the stakeholders, versus when you're in business school and, you got the one shareholder value that, that's not very motivating. It's not going to get you up out of bed. But bringing joy to children, how does the kind of principles of conscious capitalism and bringing joy to children, how does that, like on a day-to-day, basis, how do you operationalize that?
Well, I think first and foremost, we're providing a service that is supposed to make the life easier for a parent. What we used to coin as stress-free for parents and fun for kids. And I think the conscious component of that is maximizing that experience so that we're exceeding that expectation and making the life easier and providing a service that was once very, and I think if you look back at when I was younger and probably you guys too, getting a haircut was somewhat like going to the dentist. It could create trauma. And I think we can all also resonate to the time our mom gave us the bad haircut, whether it was the straight across or the bowl around your head.
Yeah, I had the bowl, and I know my mom's listening. She might be listening live, but it was brutal. It was just she'd put like tape across and trying to keep a line. Thanks, Mom. That was I appreciate your
thanks. And then it's a self-esteem thing. But I think one of the things that the glue that really brings it all together is just this shared profit through just shared purpose. And that starts with me as the leader of Cookie Cutters, making sure that I'm communicating and sharing with our franchisees and coaching, and then the culture is created from a top-down point of view. It's funny, timing is perfect. We had our franchise convention a couple weeks ago, and we got everyone together, which is a great opportunity just for community. And one of our franchisees stood up and actually mentioned the power of our culture, which I think mostly was created through the pandemic, which we can talk about in a little bit. But one thing that he said that really resonated with me was you have a choice. You can either define the culture and live by that culture, or the culture will create itself, and then you have to live with that culture. And it's so true. And I think we all have experiences where we've been in toxic environments where the culture just wasn't defined and it was allowed to spin out of control. So culture has been so important with us to bind our franchisees together, all working within that shared principle, that shared idea of if we execute with the customer in mind and providing that great experience, then the results will come, and we'll see the growth, and we'll see the repeat, and we'll see the building within our community.
Yeah, and I love that you're talking about that experience. We know from the marketing standpoint that if you can build that emotional connection, this is where you get that lifetime value. And like you mentioned, this is where you get those where your customers become your best marketers, right? And so really focusing in on that and probably auditing everything you're doing by the joy that you bring is really what brings your ROI at the end of the day.
It is. It absolutely is. And it's the package, whether it's the balloon at the end of the experience or the extra care that I've seen our stylists give a child with special needs, or that might need extra attention, or just might be absolutely freaked out and scared. And the communication with the parent. Those are impactful things. And those are the things that create the chatter and the reputation. And regardless of the marketing material, we are judged by the service which we provide and the experience that is essentially what we are selling. Haircut is a byproduct, and hair continues to grow. But what is the most important is that experience that we provide to the child and the parent collectively.
So Neal, maybe let's get into some details about the service, because there are a number out there, business leaders that may feel like this empathy and fun, and those are just nice to haves, or not really competitive advantages, as we sort of discuss and as you've mentioned here on the show. So how do you actually translate those ideas of keeping things fun and showing empathy into real business practices that eventually turn into that growth?
Well, I think it's inclusive. I think it has to be included in everything that we do. So I think it's a level of consistency. So the meetings that I have with my team, the meetings that they then have with franchisees, the meetings I have with franchisees, the coaching we provide, which then creates the culture within the salons. And then that culture, how that then extends to the customer. And for us, I mean, I think empathy is almost one of the keystones of what we do. We live in a very difficult environment. Everyone's very busy. The economic situation, who knows? And we've got parents that are coming from a whole bunch of different social economic situations. And I think accessibility is one thing that we really push. We want to make sure that we are a safe place for everyone. And I think empathy and safety come hand in hand. And I want my employees to feel safe. I want our franchisees to feel safe. And I want our customers and clients to feel safe. And I think that's the highest degree of empathy and being understanding to everyone's circumstances. I think a good example is we never turn anyone away, knowing that parents are busy. Someone might come in 10 minutes late to an appointment. We'll figure it out. We'll get you in. We maneuver. So it's being nimble. And I think to be nimble, you have to be somewhat empathetic to the situations that are being brought forth. So it's important. And you mentioned the joy piece. That's something that's really evolved in me over time. I think if you were to ask people that knew me 15, 20 years ago as an early executive, they'd say that I wasn't as joyful as I am today. And I think a lot of that comes with experience and living through the ups and the downs, and then appreciation for, it's today will come and tomorrow and today will go. And then tomorrow you start over again. And the ups and the downs just naturally occur. So I think that's a big component.
You mentioned like the safety element and the ups and the downs, and you kind of alluded to it. Tell us how you kind of navigated that pandemic and how that impacted you.
Yeah. So we were, I'll use some of my hockey terminology from my growing up in Canada, but we were on a heater. We purchased the brand back in 2015 with 25 units. We owned 5. And leading up to the pandemic, we had opened 100 locations and had contracts signed to open 180 more. And then that March day hit and we were shut down. And at that point, I got together with our key employees and we had a decision to make. We could either furlough and let people go and just ride it out, or we could buckle down and pivot and change the way we were operating on a day-to-day basis. So we went from very much external growth mode to holy mackerel. We've got 80% of our system that have only been franchisees for 2.5 years that we're just getting to the point of seeing good profits. And now all of a sudden we have this pandemic. So we went from just normal course in franchising to shutting down development almost instantaneously and changing what we do. So we went to daily town halls. I went from being a CEO looking at future vision to working with franchisees on PPP loans and making sure we were staying up to date with all the laws and requirements, and working with landlords to make sure that we were getting the abatements. And our objective was to try to get through COVID without losing any stores. And unfortunately, we lost 2, but I think we fared better than most. And we came out of that pandemic. And although I had to shut down development, and I kept it shut down until I felt like the system was stable and had a strong foundation, we came out, I think, as a much stronger unit, one that I would consider a family. And I got emotional about it last week at convention, or 2 weeks ago at convention. I look across the room, and these are people that we went to war with in the pandemic, and they are like family to me. And now I've got franchisees that have been in the system for 8.5, 9 years, which is a totally different set of circumstances. And it changes the dynamics in the meeting. It changes our one-with-one conversations. And I think because we pivoted and became so franchisee focused, it yield the benefit of, and I think not even knowing it, we were being conscious in capitalism. Like, we figured that without stores coming out of pandemic, we wouldn't have a business. And we had all these people that invested so much money, and none of this was any of their fault. So what could we do to pump the brakes on future growth and redirect our attention to really be franchisee focused? And then what could we do to make our environment safe, to encourage parents to come back in? And we did everything that we could, from an education, from sanitary to, even cutting outside in some cases in the state of California. So I'm very proud of how we handled it. I think there was probably still is some criticism about shutting down development, and I didn't reopen it until this year. And because of that, there's been some competition that has perhaps surpassed me, but I know long-term now that we made the right decision. And I think 5 years from now, we'll be in a fantastic spot because of it. I think it is just will continue to compound, and the amount of trust that was built. And you talk about success in franchising and responsible franchising. There is no franchise system that can exist and be successful without trust. That's the common link. And that's something that we really tried to build during the pandemic. And it's now extended to a point where we've got love and trust in a system because we went through it together.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really this kind of journey of sort of your emotional intelligence having to step into play here, because you've got to be empathetic to all these people in this process. And we know, like you said, you think about how the future you're going to be better for doing all this. But we know, if you've got that emotionally intelligent leader in there, you're going to have 50% higher engagement and 37% higher retention. This is what the studies show. So how has emotional intelligence, and probably going through that part of your journey, how has that shaped your leadership style?
I love that question, because I think from an overall emotional intelligence standpoint, I've evolved dramatically over time, and I'm still a very flawed human being. But I think the biggest thing is trying to put yourself in the position of the person on the other side. And I think there's a lot of franchisors out there that are they're looking at the big profit goal and maybe trying to flip to private equity. And I'm not criticizing that. That's one way to go to business. But for us individually, is we really care about the franchisee, and we work individually to try to maximize profitability and unit economics, and really focus on franchisees that struggle, because there are market conditions and things that are out of our control that we've got to be a little bit more creative to try and overcome. But I think really trying, from where I've expanded as a human and as a leader, is always trying to put myself on the other side of the table, and then try to listen a little bit more. When I first came out of business school, I wanted to be heard. I wanted to be in those boardrooms, and I wanted to make an impression. Now, one of my big things is I want to listen, and I then want to try and, with humility, come up with solutions based on their individual needs and their personalities. And that's the other thing that you realize with franchising, is everyone comes from a different background, and there isn't one size fits all ever. You can have people with similar backgrounds that just have different personalities, whether it be extroverted, introverted. They want to please, they like feedback. So it's up to me as a leader and our team to figure out what those nuances are. And I think in today's world, and with most of our stylists, who are our most important assets, They're the ones interacting with our customers. They're the ones that are providing the service and creating the experience. They're the Gen Zs and the millennials, and there's a different level of emotional intelligence needed there as well. So I think, being humble, being a great listener, having empathy or understanding for the person on the other side of the table, and then just evolving to really fit the needs of that individual. I think, as complicated as that might sound, I think that's the evolution of management in the years to come. Standardization, I think, the Jack Welch way, which was a brilliant way. I think, especially in small business, you've got to be very more dynamic and much more in tune with the person that is driving your business on the other side of the table.
Oh yeah. Anything but cookie cutter, right, Neal? Yeah, I love that point too about the market downturns, because it makes a ton of sense. The service you provide isn't necessarily a consumer staple, right? It could be considered a discretionary, and so I think creating that connection, making sure that they really value what you're bringing to market is what will impact that LTV long term. I wanted to delve into, I guess, a little bit of in the franchise space, because your organization is part of like a really big system, or is a big system, and so you lead a business that's really built at the end of the day around families, around children. For those who haven't read up on it as well, in particular, parents with special needs, parents with children with special needs. So I'm really curious to kind of delve into how do you keep that sense of heart alive as the company scales, all the way down to the franchisee level, all the way down to the employee level?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think it's one that we also covered a few weeks ago at our convention. It starts with the client first, and I've got some amazing examples of franchisees that go above and beyond, especially with those with special needs. I have one franchisee in particular that shared a story where since the pandemic, this one child comes in, and they're about 14 now, and there's a specific routine. So there's a Wednesday of every month that this child will come in with their parent, and they will let the salon know that they've arrived. The stylist has built a rapport with that child. The stylist will walk outside. She'll take her apron off. She'll walk outside. She will welcome that child. She has built a relationship with that child. She'll walk that child in. And for that 30 minutes that she's engaged, that child has become comfortable. And this is a child that has autism. And there is a routine that is set. In other cases, we have salons that will open earlier or later. We have some salons that recently have built sensory rooms for those. So it's catering to the community, but it starts with the client first. And being consistent in the delivery, and how important that theory of accessibility. We want to be the brand that is accessible to all. And that's not just price point. It's a value proposition, and that's different for every customer. And for children in particular, they all have different needs, and it's not an easy job cutting a kid's hair. They're a moving target. They've got tons of energy. They might be focused on a game and don't want to even be touched. So
short attention spans.
Yeah, it's a lot of our franchisees creating the culture in the store, and us making sure that there's consistency in the messaging. And we're very lucky to have people that have been around for a long time. Alexis has been running a store for 20 years. Christy, who has been with Cookie Cutters for 30 years and has seen everything. They run the operations side of the business. And they're the ones that are interacting day to day with the franchisees and coaching them. And then the franchisees themselves talk to one another. We had a whole breakout session, where franchisees were sharing with franchisees best practices, How do you deal with this? How do you deal with that? And that's probably more impactful than direction coming from me as the CEO. So there's an inclusivity across the board. And that's within our team, and then one level down, and then what's being executed at the store level. But those little things that our franchisees do for the people in their community, and it's done on different levels, has such a big impact. And you mentioned it just a minute ago, that retention and frequency component, and the loyalty is, those people become our biggest advocates. And we're also making their lives easier, which brings a lot of gratification and gratitude to both the franchisees and us. Listen, last year we did a 1.5 million haircuts across cookie cutters. We've recently acquired another brand, which, we're going to approach close to 2 million haircuts in a year. We can have a huge impact, and we're growing, and the market is still underserved. So it's, again, that mantra of doing the right thing and putting the client first. And if it means doing a little bit extra, fantastic.
Yeah. And so it really does come to bear, right? That customer first, people, first type of thinking is really what organizations need today to lead with more humanity and more humility, and really be able to thrive. And I think the younger generations as well are looking for that authenticity in the brands that they work with. So Neal, let's dive into the first pillar of conscious capitalism. Of course, for those maybe not familiar with the idea or the movement of conscious capitalism, there's 4 pillars: purpose, a conscious culture, a conscious leader, and then as well the various stakeholders, which isn't just shareholders and the owner and the employees, but even includes partners, vendors, and certainly the customer. So we love to talk about this particular topic of purpose a lot on this show. We ask all of our guests, what do you see as the importance of purpose in business? And then maybe if you can delve into how you've been able to transfer that purpose throughout your franchise organization.
I think purpose is really the pillar and the foundation in which we go to market. Our purpose primarily is joy. Some people might think our purpose is to try and get as many haircuts as possible. That's not our purpose. Yeah. I mean, that's the end result. Our purpose is joy, and it's from the customer and client experience, like we've talked about. And it's a unique thing, removing that trauma and making something enjoyable, but also joy for our franchisees, where they feel like they're doing something that is impacting the lives of children. The building of self-esteem for me right now is huge. The impact that social media has had, if we can have a little bit of an impact on, making a kid feel a little bit better in a very complicated and competitive world, I think we're adding a ton of value, and that comes back to the joy component. So, our main purpose is to make sure that our environment, that our experience, that our service, that everything that we do falls in that joy category. And if we deliver on that, then, our acquisition efforts will pay dividends. The long-term value will be there through retention. And our frequency will increase because people see the value in it, and it provides an escape and a service to a need and an experience that otherwise could be very traumatic, and historically has been. So I think that's our main differentiator is our focus is not on what everyone else is doing around us. Of course, as the leader, I have to put strategic vision, but we control what we control. And the number one thing is how we treat our customers and make sure that joy is the foundation of that.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've built everything around that, right? So well done. And I think for a big system, you've got a really great, core there leading the organization.
What advice would you give for our listeners out there? Maybe they aren't obviously in dealing with children and don't have to deal with, trying to have fun with children, but just trying to have fun in general at work, no matter what they're doing. What kind of advice would you give?
I have personal experience. I'm a high sensitive. I take a lot of things personally. I work hard to try not to do that. But one of the things that I try to do on a daily basis is, just balancing through the idea of this too will pass, whether it's a high or a low, which, I'm not going to sit here and say every day is perfect, because it's not. We deal with challenges every day. We do deal with customers that might feel like they didn't receive the service that they were expecting. So challenges are things that are going to occur and we can't control. I think what we can control is how we react to those things, how we make it part of our story and our learning going forward and our progression as leaders. In franchising, and especially with emerging brands, days can get really hard and monotonous and long. And sometimes you feel like you're not winning, and winning is fun, right? And anytime you get that idea that you're not winning, it's easy to beat yourself up and that dreaded shame loop and start paddling in that shame puddle. So the advice I would give is, take a breath and keep the bigger picture in mind, and look at what you're doing, and are you impacting those around you in a positive way? I think my management style has evolved over time. I think I've had managers that have showed me how not to manage people. I've also had managers that have been tremendous mentors. And, the advice I would give to everyone is extrapolate the best parts, and try to apply those. And if it means changing things, don't be afraid to change. But this too will pass, whether it's good or bad. But attitude matters. And, I'm a big athlete. You can't win them all. And that is such a true story. But you got to pick yourself up, and you got to try and get to the winning record and win a championship and build. You do that through building a pipeline and creating the right culture. And we all know that that's the recipe for success. And there's examples in business and sports and in so many different verticals, that just that positive mindset, which can get away from us, is so important.
So Neal, we want to turn to the audience here. I know we're broadcasting this live. And so one of our listeners on LinkedIn says, what advice would you give to leaders who want to bring more consciousness and compassion into the company culture?
First, you got to listen. A lot of times we think we know, but we don't really know. So picking up the phone, whether it's any stakeholder, if they're not expecting a call and they receive a call and it's from an authentic place of you wanting to understand more, knowledge is power. So the first and I think the biggest thing is open your ears and listening to the things that are going on around you, and then making decisions based on that feedback. That's powerful. We can get so caught up in our own assumptions and wanting to move fast, when if we just pump the brakes a little bit and take some time to really understand what's truly happening out in the field, out on the front lines, and even within your own teams, a lot of information and important information can be gleaned that can help change your direction, maybe change some tactics, and maybe even some of your KPIs. So I think listening is the number one thing. That's the biggest advice to change your culture.
2 ears, one mouth.
Yeah, that's right.
So Neal, one question we always ask all of our guests on this show is some form of this is, what role does love play in business?
Oh, man. We've all loved in different ways. We've all lost And I think in business, a lot of times we're afraid to act as our authentic selves, right? We want to put up, and I've done it. And as I've gotten a little longer in the tooth, I'm 50 and I'm now heading into, I think, more mature years. I think love is important because it allows us to feel, and that's the key to empathy. I've lost beautiful people in my life. I've cried with franchisees. I've lived through things with partners that have been complicated in business that we've worked together to work through. But I think in the spirit of love, which is such a broad term, I think always working towards a common solution that works for both parties, and the power of those relationships ongoing is extremely important. My biggest lesson of love is through my children, who are my why. The relationships that I built with them have taught me to be a better manager and leader. But I don't think in today's world we can proceed in a successful way, especially with how divided the country is, without some element of compassion and love in everything that we do. And we've got to love what we do. I love that we're going to do 2 million haircuts this year. I love that we can provide special services to those in need. I love that we have the potential to partner with different organizations that externally impact the lives of children and families. A big thing that our system embraced a few weeks ago at our convention, when the government was shut down and knowing the food stamps were going to probably be at risk, everyone collectively agreed that a food drive was something that we were going to do across the board, and we implemented that system-wide in a week. So, and that's love. That's love for your clients. That's recognizing and meeting your customers where they are at. And going back to the question that the listener just asked, listening is important, but listening is also a big component of love. And I'm trying to do a better job of that. A lot of times we like to hear ourselves think, but I'm trying to do it, and I still have a lot to learn. But more than anything, I try to show my system, my franchisees, and just the whole industry that I care. I'm a caring human being that wants to see the franchise industry do better. I want to see our organization do better, and that there's always room for continual improvement. And that's why I love this concept of conscious capitalism, because it's a major shift of the old definition of capitalism. The conscious component is, I think, something that's going to far outlast and outlive the old school way of capitalism. So it's a beautiful thing, and I think to embrace it is something that is a must going forward.
Without a doubt, right? Being able to move up that list of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and being able to do something bigger, for sure. So Neal, that was amazing. We thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all of these insights that you've been able to provide to us. For those maybe future franchisees or those that want to connect with you later on, learn a little bit more about Cookie Cutters, where would you like them to follow up with you?
They can go to www.haircutsaretfun.com, and that's R spelled out ARE, fun.com. Anyone that wants to reach out to me directly, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. So yeah, and then snippets.com is another place that you can find us. So this has been awesome, guys. Sorry I got a little emotional there at the end. But it's a beautiful time, and I think it's a transformative time. And so I really, really appreciate having the opportunity to participate in this topic and conversation today.
Thank you, Neal. And thank you for reminding us that, when you lead with love and purpose, profit often follows. And for our listeners today, if these conversations inspired you to rethink leadership as, more of an act of service, please share this episode with a colleague or a friend who needs it. And we will see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.